Right. So as many of you know that we try to figure out what's good and what's bad for the year. And this year there's a couple things when we finished up the meeting, um, in our December meeting, we talked a little bit about our personal health and things like that. And hopefully everybody's taking some wisdom from going to the doctors, making sure that, everybody's healthy. Springtime is here, because, if we have a sore ankle, or we have some kind of health issue, we're going to be losing our time for the year. But, so when I look at this presentation and, you look there and you see the old pirate there, this was an Airbnb customer that wanted to convert his old Gibson 44 houseboat into a pirate ship Airbnb. And those familiar up there in the Baltimore area, this was somewhere around Solomon's Island. I'm not sure if anybody ever got to see this or survey it, but that's, you know, one of the things that was a Saturday afternoon. Friend called up, said, "I'm going to go look at the boat." Let's give him a moisture meter and some tools, and said, "Go to it." He opened it up, and the engine was full of gas. So, but as you always know, that I like to come up with a cool picture. When she comes afloor, comes ashore, what are the what are the parameters of our survey and what do we look for? And if it floats or it has machinery and we're inspected, we're called marine surveyors for a reason because we do marine work. But does it have minimum safety equipment? And if not, as you can see here with the styrofoam, the cage made out of rebar and a Ford Lehman diesel motor with that leaked, pretty important there that are we qualified to do these minimum safety jobs. And so when we go through these things, as many of you know, there's Captain Joe Deary, and he was in St. Louis, Missouri last year. And as you can see, he started drinking. I'm not sure what it was, but I think he has a hollow leg and he can outdrink anybody. Well, Randy's right there with him. So, I mean, those two, don't ever try to challenge them. But it's always a good time to go hang out with those that enjoy a little bit of history and have a good time in our industry. And then this is a piece of history that a lot of people don't see. And the reason why I bring this in is because as every area, there's an industry that is starting to drop, an industry that is changing. And so these tractors are part of a net fishing industry that catch fish off the surf, and it provides a livelihood. However, the regulators are trying to shut them down as fast as they can. And then how many of you are taking value quality photos every year that you can submit it to an art show? I mean, if you take pictures when you ride on the road in the morning to work, take pictures in the afternoon at the beautiful sunsets and sunrises, there are people that like to buy those pictures. You can post them on multiple places on your personal site where people say, "Hey man, great picture for the morning." It's like I start every morning with a lot of, I try to go to the beach or somewhere. We have a lot to be thankful for every day. So I open up with, good morning from the Church of the Rising Sun, because the Church of the Rising Sun is how we start our day. And in the day, I'm about dead beat tired. And, we all are. But so you think about what is the value of your photo, think of the value of the quality of life, and think about the history of the industry that we live in and what do we see every day and what comes along next. And so this recycled metal one, I've shown this one before. I think it's a really good one, is because this guy was really creative with this barge, and what he did was he took an old water tank, he cut the water tank, he clad welded it to the side of this push boat, and I have seen it recently. I've not inspected it, but it's 30-foot boat, and there's the recycled tank that the guy welded to the side of his boat. So, we don't know what we go to every day and what to expect, but that's one of those, you think about it, and here we go. Now, this one here catches me every year at Halloween is when you see all the witches or the Wiccans up there in Boston and those areas, and they get on the I'm not sure if they're flying or what they're doing, but it's mostly women there. So they're always, it's a great picture. It looks like a lot of fun they have up in there, that area. I'm not sure who's online that might live in this area, but it looks like it'd be a great party to go to see Halloween up in the northern part of our country, up around that area. So we'll talk a little bit about fire extinguishers. Which one is the right one? Is this the one where that's the current one, or the one that was manufactured as a deficiency? The one with the pull pin horizontal or the pull pin there? So that's one, with the rules with the fire extinguishers, things change. And they change it now to where for recreational, it's every 12 years and you just flip the switch. This boat here is a shame. This boat has been more or less as a historical boat with true Western red cedar and fir as tight as grain. And this boat right now is in mothballs and half of the plank is removed from it. Framing was put to get started, and then the owner of the boat has fired the shipwrights, three different sets of shipwrights, four different times. So the boat's just sitting there going to pieces. And this is part of her right here. And it's a piece of history. So when we see a historical boat, we get a call, hey, who does historical boats? Certain areas have historical surveyors that do these type of boats. It's always good to say, hey, live in, or you get a referral to it. I mean, I do some historical boats. I think several people online I'm seeing do historical boats. But when you get these boats here, you cannot see the frames because they're buried in concrete. This boat, the whole bilges were filled with coal tar, but you couldn't see where the oak frames had split and busted out. So when you take your chance on some of the old historical boats, you really have to understand looking for broken frames, what they built them with, square nails. I mean, like a square galvanized nails, what a lot of these boats were built with, and that galvanized deteriorates, and then you get rust underneath of it, and then all of a sudden planks fall off, or you start seeing the oak frames deteriorate to where it will not hold a fastener again. And this is what's going on with this vessel. This vessel was in a $6 million rebuild or overhaul at the time when they quit. There she is again. Some of you have seen this picture before. What is this? And I'm going to zoom this out. Just hold on, see if I can zoom that out just a little bit. Um, so this is a true half, really poor installation of core in a hull. You see some core that is stuck to the hull sides. You see the voids in the core where it never stuck. You see where it tried to stick, but what you do not see is any resin that is filled in the kerfs of the blocks of the core. So when you tap along the hull of a cord boat, in the areas where you'll hear the most voids will be the shiny areas where the core never did stick. You'll hear some adhesion areas in these where the core is stuck, but most of the time you'll find moisture in those areas because the moisture runs from one end to the other of these panels, and it just was a very expensive repair. It ended up being, a surveyor said that the boat only had a 2 by 3 area of delamination and ended up cutting the whole sides of the boat off. I've showed this picture before, but you just can never go back and reemphasize how difficult it is to survey some of these boats and what you have to do with your hammer. How your hammer is a very key component. Thermal imaging is good, but between your moisture meter, which is a tool, your thermal camera is a tool, your hammer is a tool, audio gauges are tools, your eyes, ears, senses, everything that you use has a reference to this. And one of the things that we're finding now, and we're hearing a little bit more about this, is when surveyors are starting to get challenged, whether they're level one surveyor or whether they're NAMS or SAMS members or an ACMS surveyor or NAVTech, or how you write your reports. One of the critical things that needs to be noted is that when you say you're using these tools, those tools are reference tools. So when you write in your report, make sure that you do reference the tools that you use and make sure that you're saying these are reference tools, because if the lawyers now are challenging surveyors in court over what tools they're using, how they use them. And as many of you know, that when we had our meeting back in December, we had what we call the moisture meter challenge. Hopefully some of you have taken that same challenge and are using it yourself to prove that, even though the protometer they think is the best meter, well, there's some surveyors that got several of those protometers and each one is different. Some are broken when they come or not. You've also got the Tramax meter. If you're putting on a GRP setting, the GRP setting is not is a little bit inaccurate. But if you go to the hardwood setting and you compare it to the other meters, such as the Klein, the General, um, Cobalt, Um, they all come up to pretty close to the same. The good old GRP 33 or some of those electrophysics meters, those meters are still pretty consistent with determining moisture. So finding an old GRP to use that as a good reference tool because you can calibrate that unit to a glass and to a copper strap. One of the things that we're finding is that when we're doing these panels and that we're seeing here is that you can't see through that fiberglass until you cut a hole in it. And once this boat was rebuilt, this was the restoration of this boat in which this builder did vacuum infusion. So we went and surveyed this boat at the end of the day. I followed along with the progression of the rebuild so that from this point here of these panels being cut out, which were 4x4 panels or 6x6, when we went back, the builder was very sharp with his resin infusion, and he came back and did a nice core job, as you can see here. And that job ended up being the boat was purchased for $800,000, and more or less this boat was restored for $850,000 and put back in service. So, but if that surveyor had been challenged in court, that's what exactly would have happened with that. He would have been challenged and probably would have had a pretty tough way to go because he would have had troubles. A lot of us in the past couple of years have seen this where we've got boats that are sitting around idle and still. The divers are $100 a month. Hauling out pre-purchase inspections $250. The question I get asked a lot is, if a boat is in this kind of condition, been neglected for several years, who pays for the hull cleaning? Who pays for the zincs? I mean, that's usually a pretty good question to kind of throw up on the table because I get asked that a lot. I said, look, man, I said, I have expectations that I could go push the start buttons and we could go for a sea trial and the diver been on the boat. But when you have a boat that's been anchored to the boat dock for a couple of years and it looks like this, do you think it's fair for your customer in the pre-purchase inspection to pay for that? I mean, so I'm not really sure how that works out. I know different areas have different thoughts, different considerations. But I mean, my opinion is this customer who was a seller, he ended up paying for zincs. He ended up paying for the bottom being pressure washed so that we could survey it. And that would be a pretty good practice for surveyors to think about. Okay, well, why is my customer paying for something that's outside of the normal of a haul out inspection? Now, this is where I think we're seeing a lot of challenges, not only with old traditional subchapter T boats. We've got subchapter M in here, and now we've got the conceptions ruling about what happened in that fire. But one of the things I had a challenge when we had, if those that attended the Norfolk meeting, we had Captain or Admiral Busby there, and he talked about that as that, when inspections are done by the Coast Guard, they're going down their checklist. And we saw last past winter when we had the instructor from Yorktown, he talked a little bit about what they're training, but they don't go to the next level of some of this type of training, but it's based on what's there. But the trainer of the trainer, so you're getting Yorktown inspectors training Yorktown graduates or A school graduates trying to go out in the field and make a decision, which hopefully doesn't cost a life. But I've followed behind Coast Guard inspectors on COI boats, tugboats, and vessels like that. And when I go look at their reports and I see it's a sheet, a pink sheet, a yellow sheet, and they check box and they say, okay, this is right, this is wrong, you got 30 days to comply with it. Well, then you come back and you find that the Gumby suits are underneath the bunks and things like that. It's kind of like with the conception. They determined that the fire, I believe, was from a a battery in a computer, and that as the boat was modified to more living passengers, they then never did expand the capacity for the escape route or egress from the forward stateroom below deck. So they only had one, and they were trapped with the fire and could not get out of there. So a lot of things like that we have to be aware of when we're starting to look at some of these vessels. Um, here's a good here's a good example of a bullshit damn um, installation of a fire suppression system. I mean, this was a brand new. This was on a $4 million rebuild, and that's how they mounted that in there because during COVID they didn't have the short bottles. And then if you look at where it's installed, it's blowing straight up into the ceiling, so it's really not pressurizing the engine room, and the bottle size did not meet capacity for the engine room. So a lot of times when you look at the capacity label on this, kind of look at what size is, kind of guess at how many cubic feet it is. But remember, most of these boats they did not have fire vents on the systems to shut off the ventilation going into the engine room. So if one of these systems goes off, that system is only going to be good for maybe a minute and a half or 2 minutes. And then if it's a real fire, it's going to catch back on, it'll recatch, and then you're not unable to put the fire out. So ventilation, Delta T's, those type of blowers, hopefully are connected into the system. Um, but that's so when you're doing the rebuilds and the refits, something that have to be really careful about and making sure that they're doing their job. And then the other part is, hold on, let me get it, is the height. The Coast Guard height is 28 inches from the ceiling down. But if you think about it, the fire is going to be at the top of the engine room for an extended period of time before there's enough heat and fire in that engine room to trigger that sensor on the end of that fire bottle. And you see the two wires that are off to the side. That's for an alert, and also it goes into the should go into the ignition system and into the delta T's of the engine ventilation to shut those down if there is in case of a fire. One of the things that if many of you know, if you remember John McDevitt, John was very specific, and he was always had a fight with ABYC and some that he felt um, that all vessels should have smoke alarms, and he believed in a smoke alarm in the engine room because if there's smoke in the engine room and you can't smell it because the fire suppression system's not going to go off if that happens. So just some of those things to be careful of when you're looking around in fire systems, where things are. And here's a good example. This is on a sport fish boat on a repower. They added in two gyros in it, ice maker. As you can see, it's all jammed in. But what is that fire suppression bottle going to do? Is that a note to the customer saying, "Hey, look, this fire suppression bottle needs to be relocated"? Um, that's a big challenge because they just spent 250, 300,000 on this boat to put a fire to do the engine room, and there's a fire suppression bottle which won't put out a fire at the front end of the port engine of the engine room, forward port side of the engine room, if there's a fire in that compartment. A little bit of stray current. How many times you walk up to the dock and you see a dock pole that looks like that? I mean, that's always good, isn't it? So I'm really glad that, so when you walk around the dock, make sure you take a look at the receptacles and the plugs because that will definitely take you out. This was stray current in the patina that was popping off from a pole that had a bad ground. And here's what the results were. All the scratches and everything in this area was where the short that was not on that power pole, it's a different pole. But looking at this and whether the propellers were grounded in the mud, or you're looking at this picture with a different respect. That's where the diver went in, and that's where his tools were scraping the bottom paint and the primer. But you can see the patinas on these surfaces starting to develop from the stray current there. I mean, I love when somebody says, "Well, we got electrolysis," and I tell them that they need to carry the electrolysis to a different level, and it's always stray current. It's the 14 definitions of stray current and or how we have current. So what's missing in this picture here? It's a pretty good one. We got a ground wire. We're missing a couple hose clamps and T-bolts. But why are they putting a ground on the stuffing box itself? I always wondered that because the stuffing box itself is most of the time when it's this jam nut is usually part of the bonding system of the motor. You have contact there. So just make sure it's all working. Put your continuity checker on your systems and show what's going on. Out of inspection fire extinguishers, that's every day. Fire extinguisher label, I got a pretty good big old humor charge out of this. So why do you put a sticker upside down with a fire extinguisher? I guess the guy's assuming that he's in Australia and he's down under and that the boat's going to be upside down. Looking, he'll be looking for the fire extinguisher when the boat goes upside down in his fire there. Then we got powder post beetles. This was in a piece of teak, and we don't see powder post beetles in teak. So we think that this could have come from where the wood was harvested, and it would be in teak. Probably it was just when they milled it, and it was not active powder post beetles. There's a good old long run. Looks like an old termite trench there. That's from when the cleaners have been cleaning it. Let's see here. So I'm not sure who's doing oil and coolant samples, but this is a pretty good example out of one set of motors. You had the left bottle, which was a coolant sample, and that was rust. The center one was pretty good. And then we've got a purple sample and black oil out of two motors. So when we reference this to our customers, it's always one of those things on a Sunday afternoon or Saturday, you do them and mechanic's not around, so you have to wait for the lab to come back with your results and try to be knowledgeable. But most of the time, this is one of the ones you'll call the lab up and say, explain to me each one of those samples so you can explain to your customer. Or you tell your customer, hey, look, we need to do a little bit more diagnostics than me saying, hey, look, we did a C-tron, we took oil and coolant samples. And you'll find a lot of times that when you see those bad samples, that was good. This was one of the boats that we can't see much, but this came out of one of our classes. Whereas the aluminum mass cracked and checked. Some people say they can repair it. Some people say they can weld it up. Um, I'm not a big fan of what's going on here, but I can't tell you the best way to fix it, but it is a crack, and that is definitely a mass failure about to happen. You also, if you look here where they crimp here, you can see the indentation. So I think Dave Bradley does a lot of this stuff. Bob Turner down in Charleston. So they're the guys that we have around that are knowledgeable. I know Annapolis has a bunch of riggers that are in the area, Baltimore. So looking for your resources to help you with your survey is very important. This was a find after the lake. I think this was off of Facebook Yacht Club, if I'm not mistaken, where this boat had been sunk for a while. And I think when one of the lakes went so far down, it looks like a J24. So I wonder what the insurance company paid off, being they couldn't find the boat, because it looks like that's been on the bottom for a right good while. Um, and then this was one from Charlie, Missouri, a couple of years ago. So this boat was a VRBO. It was used as for a gator hunting. Um, where the gator hunters would go and rent it for the season, and had 12 bunks in a 44-foot houseboat. It sank, and the guy just said he lost $6,000 for that first week of gator season. But Charlie said, I'm not in the VRB business, but I'm just telling you, your boat sank. And here's the top of the motor that you can see. that when he went inside of it, you can see this motor probably hadn't been running in a while. So when you do your motor outboards and stuff, always make sure what's going on. This is great patina work here. Wing nut, but nothing we can do about that except for explain that, hey, look, number of wires, wing nut, and there's 6 wires where it's only supposed to be a maximum of 4, which was under the ABYC standards. Um, Look how nice and neat that panel is. There's no head on the boat, and you see that marine sound system in there. That builder and that owner there's 4 speakers right there that had 22 speakers on a 32-foot center console. And that he needed all that power to run that stereo amp system on that boat. Not really sure about those systems because I just think it's overkill. And this is what our normal panel looks like on it. So when we're looking at these, I'm not sure how y'all write and observe and report these, but it's kind of a wreck. Then you send this picture in your report to the insurance company and you put a note in it. Well, the wires are disorganized because they're supposed to be supported every so far according to ABYC in your findings. And then you see the coiled up battery wires in there. So then you got the coil cables over here on the right. So a lot of that there is common sense. Observe what you see, make sure your switches work, but look for what's going on. These are the same 2 type of boats, container 32s. This was the one a couple of weeks later that I did. But if you look at the 2, look at the difference in the 2 boats and how they're wired and configured. You wish that every boat looked like that because it makes your job a lot easier to survey them. But this is the normal that we get every day is this. So I love those big batteries. See how they got them vented? Like a lot of times they say how the batteries vented, where there are slits for being vented. And that's pretty good installation there. We like to see those. There's a lot of times we don't see them that look like that. But I've always had this one question I've asked several people in the industry. How many wires does this count towards on a negative terminal? There's 2 on that side of the bolt, 1 and 3 there. So is that too many? Or does each stud categorize themselves for 4 wires? Now that's a question that you always have to ask, like the guys at ABYC on the telephone, because that's what they do. Here's one here, another one with 4 on this side and 1 on that side. Not really sure, but it's always a good thing to use your resource at ABYC, especially in your reports. That's something you can never take away from your reports is ABYC findings and you put in a report, because both NAMS and SAMs are very critical about what you're putting in your reports, making sure that you reference the finding and you reference a CFR or ABYC or some finding, because if you ever get challenged, it's back to when we were talking about our reference tools. Your reference tools is what you work with every day. Well, the ABYC findings, the Coast Guard CFRs, the fire NFPA 302 or the NEC National Electric Code, that is what our industry depends on in making our boats safe, give us opportunities to move forward in a great industry that we work in. But then all of a sudden, somebody just forgets, and then all of a sudden, the lawyers and insurance companies get in the middle of it, and we go from there. This is what we see a lot of now, and you're starting to see lack of maintenance on lower units. Biggest thing, pitting, then you see the extra corrosion. And then, so where do you look at the zincs? I took the Certec class last year and saw the fella from talk about checking all of the grounding wires in the outboards by taking your ohm meter or your continuity checker just to go around and check to make sure that everything is bonded in the motors, the little wires that are throughout. And you got 4 or 5 checkpoints to make sure, and that would hopefully help protect that. But however, if you have a hot dock, that's another thing. But this lower unit, this was a lower unit from down in South Florida. It still has, the guys put 3,000 hours on the same lower unit that you see there, and he uses tough gel and to clean it, and he also uses Teflon tape to seal up the plugs, and he's still running. And the guy's amazed that he hasn't blown the lower unit up. So a little bit of common sense. Here it is again. When I went to check the lower unit oil, I did not even get close to it because of all the corrosion in it, and I didn't want to have to replace the lower unit checking the oil. As you can see, the screws right there. Nice installation, but what do you see here? Don't you see some cracks in the hull sides? So when we reserve those, observe and report, further investigation, have a technician inspect them, look at them, make repairs. The insurance company wants to see those in their references, but the covers are over top of the trip terminals, batteries. The battery switches are not labeled, but that where the cracks are is a detriment to that survey. Black wire, red terminals, inline fuse. This is one of those test questions that ABYC and SAMs and NAMs, all of them like to ask this question. How many terminals can be on the current wire? How many of them have to be fused? So you see two fuses here. You even see a fuse on the ground on this one. And you got the wing nut. So you got a lot of different things going on with that battery, which does give you the points to pass your test. This is it again, the same battery with the black wire. So I got the double page pictures in there. I always enjoyed this picture because who was paying attention to the height. So does the insurance company pay for somebody being stupid, not paying attention? Because right on the other side of that picture is where the draw was that he could have gone underneath of, and how many times did he go underneath that bridge? But we survey boats, and the insurance company says we can't make the stuff up, but we pay for a lot of people that do that. Lithium ion batteries, everybody has this blank in it because I'm not a big lithium fan. I know that we're having to do more and more lithium work. But this is what I see all the time. I see lithium batteries and people getting hurt off of lithium batteries. This was somebody who was somewhere where he shouldn't have been. And there's my good friend Scott Miller's boat. He said it's 5 o'clock somewhere. And it is 5 o'clock. Look at all those fives. I know Randy's always says it's 5 o'clock every day when he gets out of bed because he's got somewhere to be so he can get home. And then here, just to wrap up on that, these are my buddies that used to travel with me. Both of these dogs are not with me anymore, but those two dogs created more fun for the customers and the kids around because it gave the kids a distraction, gave the parents a distraction. So it's not always bad to have a distraction with you when you go on a survey. And as many people go to Solomon's Island, there's the old tiki bar. There's a lot of good times there. And let's see what else we got. And then I'm gonna go put my feet in the sand and rest for the rest of the afternoon. So, Mike, you got any questions or anything? I think I've given you asked for like 45 minutes. I think I kind of accomplished that.
Wow, thanks, Lloyd. Any questions, any observations? I mean, I just take my hat off to you again because it's a great way to end a 2-day event.
Yeah.
It's kind of light-hearted. Well, on one level, it's light-hearted. On another level, it's quite shocking. So, really appreciate you being with us today, Lloyd. Thanks very much.
Yeah,
Thanks, Lloyd.
let me see if I can find a pretty cool picture. Let's see if this is it for today. Hold on. Yeah. So if I'm still allowed to go for just one more minute.
Yeah, of course, sure.
Okay, so let's go back and talk about photography for a minute because, well, I got a couple other things. Here is the most black wires I've seen on a black terminal. That was on a boat I surveyed this week. That's a lot of black wires. And I love this Genius battery charger, charging batteries. HIN number, which is painted over. I got this email from the customer, and he gave me this long list about everything that he's done since I wrote his notes on his boat. This is the best HIN number I have found so far. Associated vessel with this number here, 0002198. That is a HIN number which was used by the bank to loan $209,000 on. So sometimes when you look at the abstracts, make sure that you pay attention to that number because sometimes these are account numbers. However, it says HIN associated with this vessel is. So I always look into paperwork on the boats. Back to my dogs. These damn things are funny as hell. That was Emma. She decided to be a car inspector that morning. Let's see what else I had there. That was the chip. Let's see here. But there's my mom. Let's see. All right, so that's back to the fishing guys at the sea. But I wanted to get down here to this one. Not sure if any of you have seen installation of engines. This is a MTU 2600 being installed in a Wanchese. There's a fellow down there. That's all he does is specializes in engine installations. Probably one of the best there is. He made up his own apparatus to be able to reach these off of a crane. He does these installations. There's the boom a doom. That's Hathaway right there. And he slides them in there, and that boom works miracles. But one of the things is that the door, that's a $32,000 fix to fix that door, and that's Fotique. So they got to redo that. But he drops them in, and great, great way to share. And this here was my genius of the week. If you look carefully at this picture here, what do y'all see there? Isn't there a fire pump in the middle, gasoline fire pump right beside a battery, right in the enclosed compartment? And that was on a towing vessel. And I called it the customer and said, "Hey, look, man, that's kind of a safety violation, not only because of the gas, but you've also got the battery there, which was the spare battery, which they would hand over to somebody if they needed it, for a jump." See what else I had here. I mean, just trying to, but back to the clouds. And or it just in photography, I mean, Jonathan Klopman likes to talk about forensic photography and does a really good job in the industry about making sure what you see in your camera is what you print and what you post. And if you look in this picture, it's just a cloud, but you see a couple faces there. There's a face there, there's another face down in here, and there's one back in here. All of which, are fun to talk about. You have good I had a cloud one day and I was hoping I could find it. It was Donald Trump in the cloud. But look at the face there. But it was a red cloud, had red hair, stood up just like Donald Trump. So I said, damn, I can't remember where that one went to. But so always when, like I said earlier, you get up early in the morning, look around and see how beautiful things are, and you see the sun and you just don't see it every day. You see history going away from us. This railway is getting ready to go away. So you always are looking for what's there today because it might not be there tomorrow.
Mm.
But it's always fun to see how that's the sun in that light. So take those pictures and post them up, make them Christmas cards for your friends, or just send them. It does give somebody a happy smile for the day when you do something like that. I mean, it's just you don't get many times to do it. Every sunrise is different, every sunset's different, and every challenge you have every day is a little bit different. And there's back to you can't get away from the oil and coolant samples. Nothing changes in that line of business for us. Let's see what else did I have there for you there, Mike? These are all crazy old. On your T-boats, one thing that you need to make sure of is that they have a drug consortium they're members of, and they have everything posted where they can do it, whether it's the COI certificate, whether it's the consortium agreements, but everything needs to be in a box. And most of the time you can't find the box because it's buried underneath the console. So always put it in perspective where things are. This is a Dave Bradley. I'm going to zoom this in just a little bit. As Dave says, always look for the corrosion on these fittings. The next picture shows.
Please do.
That's all Dave Bradley. He teaches. He's taught me a lot about corrosion. I think there's a couple others that talk about corrosion. But when I sent this fitting, which is cracked, let me zoom in, and a whisker stay, there's the crack right there. There's all the corrosion. Look at the terminals. So Dave was always said, look, if you see the corrosion here, make a note of it. Make sure that you recommend that it comes off so you can look behind it because of all the different things that happen in the metallurgical arena with rust and corrosion. And that's all. And that's because of the breakdown, the deterioration. Here's another bob stay fitting where they don't have enough washers, but they got 4 spacers in there, but they didn't use washers. Let's see, where's the other one? There's one more in here that was a pretty good one. This is all this week. Let's see. There's a crack, bad tabbing. This boat was built out of mat. So a lot of times you got to understand how you're building your boats or what these boats are being built out of. Whether it's a core, mat, structure. We talked a little bit about that back in December. Great way to stack up your batteries in the way. Mike, I think that was it.